Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open something a little timeless. You're not just wandering through a dusty museum or reading faded hieroglyphs. You're stepping into the hush of an ancient Egyptian tomb. Torchlight flickers over carved limestone walls. The air is dry and still laced with the faint scent of dust, old linen, and something darker. Frankincense, maybe. You descend slowly, and as the stone door casks open, the chamber reveals itself. Gold gleams in the dim light. Jars stand sealed. Baskets bulge slightly with their ancient contents. Everything is exactly where it was placed thousands of years ago. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive long in ancient Egypt. Between the blazing heat's strict rituals and giant jackal-headed gods judging your heart, it's not exactly Airbnb friendly. But don't worry, you're not on your own. I'll walk you through it step by step. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? I love seeing all the sleepy time travelers checking in from different corners of the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The silence inside is thick, soft, watchful. Along the walls, everything is organized with ritual precision clay jars, sealed with wax-woven baskets tucked into corners, tiny carved statues standing at attention. This wasn't a place for mourning. It was a place to prepare for the next life. Historians still debate whether tombs were stocked all at once or gradually in ceremonial stages, but they agree on this. Every item had meaning. Nothing was left to chance. You kneel beside a low stone table. Resting on top a loaf of bread, hard as rock, a shriveled fig, and a painted cup, once full of beer or milk. It's a packed meal, meant for someone who might get hungry on the long journey beyond death. Next to it, a linen bundle tied with palm cord. You untie it gently. Inside, sandals, woven reeds, shaped by time, still faintly curled with the memory of feet. Why sandals? Because in the afterlife, just like in Egypt, the ground could be blisteringly hot. You were going to walk, so you needed shoes. As your eyes adjust, you spot something big in the center, the sarcophagus. It rests like a guardian in the shadows, carved with protective spells and quiet warnings. But we'll get to that later. For now, you turn to the outer edges. Offerings and objects are grouped by type food, near the door tools along one wall, charms and scrolls nestled close to the body. The whole room is like a map of needs, everything the soul might require packed lovingly and precisely. You pass a wooden box, its lid inlaid with blue faience tiles. Inside, folded cloth glints of gold, faint traces of perfume. Whoever was buried here wasn't just meant to survive death. They were meant to arrive in style. Outside, the desert sighs quietly against the entrance. Inside, the air doesn't move. Time is perfectly still, as if holding its breath. You take one more step surrounded by echoes of ancient belief and prepare to unpack what the dead believed they would need forever. You kneel beside a wide stone basin filled with the residue of ancient natron crystals that once dried and purified the body like a spiritual sponge. Before the grand objects, before the golden masks came, the real work, making sure the body wouldn't rot. Mummification, you quickly realize, wasn't just preservation, it was transformation. The Egyptians didn't want to keep the body as is. They wanted to shape it into a vessel strong enough to survive eternity. And to do that, they began with salt knives and ritual. You watch as priests in jackal masks, symbolizing Anubis god of embalming, remove the internal organs with practiced care, not a speck of haste. The lungs, the liver, the intestines, and the stomach each cleaned, dried, and stored in a canopic jar. The heart, that depends. Historians still debate whether it was always left in place since it was considered the seat of the soul, or removed and magically reinstalled later. You can almost hear them arguing over papyrus scraps thousands of years too late. Quirky fact, the brain, despite being well, your brain was considered pretty useless. Embalmers scooped it out through the nose with long bronze hooks, then tossed it. You shift a little in discomfort, imagining the squelch, the quiet flick of linen wiping tools clean. Once emptied, the body was packed with linen and natron, then left to dry for 40 days. That's longer than some modern vacations. You imagine the dry desert air mingling with the salt, slowly drawing out every last drop of moisture. When the wait was over, the wrapping began. But not just any wrapping. You look closely at one mummy's bandages. They're layered with intention, ankles first, then legs, then arms crossed on the chest. Between the layers, amulets were inserted to protect vital parts. A small scarab might sit over the heart. A golden eye of Horus might rest on the throat. Each symbol was placed like a password, like magical armor. The face receives special attention. Linen pads the cheeks, smooths the brow. Sometimes a painted mask is laid on top. Gold for pharaohs, painted plaster for the wealthy. The idea was clear. You had to be recognizable in the afterlife, but not exactly human. You had to look like something more, something divine. You step back and take it in. The bandaged form lies still, hands crossed, face serene. Not creepy, not cursed, just ready. Historians still debate how consistent the rituals were. Did poorer families get rush jobs? Did regional traditions differ? Probably, but the intent stayed the same. Prepare the body like a sacred scroll meant to be unrolled by the gods. Nearby, you see a tray of embalmer's tools, obsidian blades, bronze hooks, bowls once filled with oils, cedar, myrrh, juniper. Each had its scent, its purpose. Some were meant to purify, others simply kept the flies away. You lean in and sniff the air near the tray and swear you can still catch a trace of pine resin. Another odd discovery. Tiny wax figurines of gods slipped into the folds like bookmarks. Anubis, of course, but also Osiris and even the goddess Maat, feather in hand. You realize they weren't just preserving a body. They were telling a story, wrapping not just flesh, but identity, memory, hope. You move to the foot of the platform where a priest might have once knelt. Final prayers would be said, hands raised, words spoken softly in old Egyptian, long lost, except in fragments carved into tomb walls. Words meant to open the gates, to invite the soul forward whole and unbroken. And just like that, the mummy is no longer someone dead. It's someone arriving. You glance around the chamber again. All this, everything in the room only works because the body has been prepared with care, with faith, with craft. You don't need to believe in Osiris to feel the weight of it. The quiet dignity, the absolute seriousness with which this person, rich or poor, was readied for a second life. You walk quietly past the platform, heart a little slower, breath a little deeper. In death, the Egyptians didn't just preserve the body. They believed they were preserving the soul's path forward. And somehow, across 3,000 years and a sea of sand, their message still gets through. You step around the embalming table and come face to face with the final product of all that careful work, the coffin, or rather coffins plural. Because here's the thing about ancient Egyptian burials, one box was never enough. What you're looking at is a sort of nesting doll arrangement, each layer more intricate than the last. The outer coffin is huge, rectangular, carved from thick cedar and painted with guardian figures along each panel. Its job, protection. It's the armored shell, the fortress for what lies inside. You brush your fingers lightly over the surface. The paint is cracked, the wood darkened with time, but you can still make out the images: Isis spreading her wings over the foot panel, Anubis kneeling beside a golden scale, the 4 sons of Horus standing watch. Historians still argue whether these motifs were chosen by the deceased or standardized like some kind of divine IKEA catalogue. Either way, every image had a purpose: to guard, to guide, to remind the gods who they were dealing with. Inside that, is a second coffin, this one shaped like a human. This is the anthropoid coffin, and it's the one you're most familiar with. Face painted gold, wide eyes outlined in thick black lines. The body wrapped in rows of hieroglyphs and protective spells. This coffin's purpose identity. It tells everyone, mortal and divine, exactly who rests within. Quirky fact, the face isn't always a true portrait. In fact, it rarely is. Instead, it shows an idealized version of the person, ageless, calm, slightly divine. You weren't trying to look like your earthly self. You were trying to look like your eternal self. The version of you who gets a seat at the table of Osiris and isn't awkward at dinner parties. And yes, there's more. Inside the anthropoid coffin, there's often a third one, smaller, tighter, sometimes made of gilded wood or cartonnage, a kind of ancient papier-mâché made from linen and plaster. This one hugs the mummy directly, like a second skin. It's the innermost wrapping, the final embrace before the long journey begins. You lean over and peer into one that's been carefully opened by archaeologists. The interior is painted with stars. Yes, stars. The inside of the coffin was often imagined as the night sky turning the body into a piece of the universe itself. You feel a chill not from fear, but from how complete the symbolism is. You weren't just being buried, you were becoming part of the cosmos. Historians still debate how standardized these coffin sets were. Some tombs had 5 nested layers, others had just 1 or 2. And while pharaohs had the gold-plated deluxe versions, ordinary citizens sometimes painted their own coffins by hand or hired local artists. The quality varied, but the intent never did. As you circle the room, you find fragments of coffin lids propped against a wall. One has been broken clean through the middle, possibly by grave robbers, possibly by time itself. Even in pieces, it's gorgeous. Lapis blue outlines, ochre skin tones and hieroglyphs arranged like a hymn. You pause, squinting, to decipher one line. It's a spell from the Book of the Dead, asking for safe passage through the realm of the West. At your feet, a thin strip of inlaid wood gleams faintly. It once framed the foot of a coffin, and carved into it is a tiny falcon, Horus himself watching, waiting. You smile. Even in miniature, the guardians remain. Quirky side note, some coffins had false eyes painted on the side, so the deceased could see out into the world. They weren't meant to sleep forever. They were meant to rest aware, watching for their time to rise. You step back, taking it all in, the layers of craftsmanship, the cosmic symbolism, the sheer dedication to getting the container just right. This wasn't about vanity. It was about function. If your body is the vehicle to eternity, then the coffin is the protective shell, equal parts spaceship palace and prayer book. And yet, despite the grandeur, something very human lingers. You picture the family standing nearby as each layer is closed. The creak of wood, the final sealing, the quiet goodbye. These coffins aren't just art. They're acts of love, of hope, of trust in a world beyond. You move quietly to the center of the chamber once more, letting your eyes adjust to the shifting light. The outer coffin looms before you, still sealed. Inside are layers within layers within layers, each telling a story, each holding a dream, and all of it packed not for death, but for arrival. You kneel beside a limestone chest, its lid carved with looping script and crowned with the figures of 4 strange beings, each with a different head. One has a jackal's snout, another a baboon's grimace, the third a hawk's hooked beak, and the last bears a human face, serene and timeless. These are the 4 sons of Horus, and inside this chest they guard something most sacred, the organs. Yes, those lovingly removed, dried and seasoned bits from the mummification process didn't just disappear. They were preserved too carefully, wrapped and sealed in what we now call canopic jars. Each organ had its own guardian spirit and corresponding jar, like an ancient buddy system. You gently lift the lid of one jar. The top is heavy, carved from limestone, shaped like Duamutef, the jackal-headed protector of the stomach. Inside, linen, soft, dry, curled into itself like a resting bird. Somewhere in that bundle once was part of a person's body, tucked safely under layers of spell and prayer. Historians still debate whether all Egyptians had the full set of canopic jars. While royals and elites definitely did, poorer individuals sometimes skipped the jars entirely, or used symbolic ones, empty vessels meant to suggest the real thing. You imagine a grieving family deciding whether they could afford real limestone or just a painted clay imitation. Beside the main chest, you spot another set. These are faience glazed a pale blue-green. One jar has a small chip on its rim, like it was knocked during the burial process, and quietly set back in place, imperfect, but still reverent. You can feel the care with which someone packed these. A quirky fact, some high-status tombs included dummy jars sealed, but empty, just to maintain the ritual formality. To the gods, the gesture mattered more than the guts. Each son of Horus had their duty. Imseti, human-headed, protected the liver. Hapi, baboon-headed, guarded the lungs. Duamutef, jackal-headed, oversaw the stomach. Kebesenuef, falcon-headed, watched over the intestines. You imagine these jars not just as storage containers, but as magical vaults, each holding a piece of the body's eternal puzzle. And the chest, that was no ordinary box. It was a shrine, a miniature temple tucked into the tomb's corner. Carved along its edges are protective spells, short and direct. May nothing foul approach. May fire not touch. May the breath of eternity be constant. You murmur them aloud slowly, as if trying them on your own tongue. The hieroglyphs feel weighty, rhythmic, like ancient passwords. You move toward a separate niche where a different kind of container catches your eye. A long, slender box carved from sycamore and painted with faint lotus blossoms. Inside, bundles wrapped in cloth, their labels written in quick, neat brushstrokes. These, you realize, are reserve heads, false skulls, sculpted to stand in if something happened to the real one. Historians still debate whether they were literal backups or symbolic decoys to trick would-be soul snatchers. Either way, you find yourself impressed. These people planned for everything. Nearby sits a long wooden tray, its contents carefully arranged, tiny glass vials of scented oil, bits of linen scrap, carved wax amulets, embalmers' leftovers perhaps, or maybe last-minute additions placed by the family. You pick up a scrap of cloth. It smells faintly of cedar and something smoky like ancient incense still clinging to its fibers. You pause at a painting above the jars. It shows a figure, eyes lined in thick coal arms outstretched, standing before a table with the very same 4 jars. Above, a falcon spreads its wings. The text reads, "My body is whole. My name endures. My soul is unbroken." Even in death, even disassembled, the person buried here believed they would rise whole, that the jars weren't tomb decor, but key components in the soul's reassembly. You take one last look inside the chest. The linen-wrapped contents lie quiet and still, but the magic, you realize, was never just in the object. It was in the intention, in the belief that if you protected the organs, the soul could breathe again. And somewhere in the great halls of the next world, you imagine those 4 sons still standing, guard jars cradled in their arms, whispering softly to the gods. This one is ready. This one is whole. You move slowly across the tomb chamber, your eyes drawn now not to the grand gilded sarcophagus, or even the solemn jars tucked into the walls, but to a quiet glint in the sand, a thin gold chain. You crouch and gently pull it free. Dangling from its end is a delicate scarab, its surface etched with tiny hieroglyphs, barely visible to the naked eye. This isn't just jewelry. This is a charm, a spell, a shield. Welcome to the jewelry of the afterlife. a category that walks the line between fashion and theology. You glance around and spot more glintz green. Faience beads a small copper ring resting near the left foot of the body, a pendant shaped like the Eye of Horus, lying nestled in a folded linen pouch. These items weren't buried just for decoration. They were tools, charms, magical armor. Quirky fact: ancient Egyptians believed that amulets didn't just represent power, they contained it. If you buried someone with an amulet of the Ankh, the looped cross symbol for life, you weren't just giving them hope. You were placing literal life force at their side like a divine battery pack. You pick up a broad collar necklace, the kind you've seen in museum displays, but never this close. It's made of tiny, careful beads in teal ochre and deep blue. Inlaid between the rows are tiny lapis flowers, their edges softened by time. You run your thumb along them and picture the person who wore it centuries ago, looking into a mirror, knowing this necklace would be the last thing they ever put on. Historians still argue which amulets were most essential. Some lists, like those found in the Book of the Dead, suggest as many as 75 different protective charms might be buried, with a person each performing a specific function. Some were for strength, some for balance, some to keep your mouth from sealing shut in the afterlife. Yes, really. You move toward the body and notice amulets placed in key locations. A Djed pillar amulet near the spine, symbolizing stability. A Tayet knot, often associated with the goddess Isis, resting near the hips. A heart scarab inscribed with the negative confession laid gently over the chest. You lean closer to the heart scarab. Its text reads something like, "Do not stand against me in judgment. Do not weigh me falsely." This wasn't bling. It was a legal defense, a pre-written testimony pinned directly over your heart, in case the gods tried to catch you slipping. There's another layer to the jewelry here too: status. That ring of gold around the fourth finger. It wasn't just a gift from a spouse. It signaled wealth connection or access to skilled artisans. Even in the afterlife, some Egyptians hoped their adornments would impress divine officials. A small open box nearby holds even more treasures: a blue faience frog, a falcon carved from ivory, a tiny seated baboon. Some are wrapped in linen, others packed in straw, all of them designed to whisper on behalf of the deceased, to speak to gods in the symbolic language of beauty and belief. Quirky side note: some tombs included cosmetic kits, coal pots, applicator sticks, perfume jars, because looking presentable to the divine was no joke. It wasn't vanity, it was spiritual hygiene. You find one such set tucked in a corner, a tiny bronze mirror, its surface dulled with age, and a reed brush still stained black. The coal used was made from lead-based minerals, dangerous, yes, but believed to protect the eyes from disease and from evil spirits. Nearby lies a slender stick of perfume wax shaped like a cone. Historians still debate exactly how these were used, placed atop wigs and allowed to melt slowly during rituals, or just symbolic, never lit at all. Either way, they were fragrant prayers made visible. You realize something else: almost every piece of jewelry here is inscribed. Even the smallest ring bears a symbol, a cartouche, a protective glyph. In a world where writing was sacred, no inch of ornament went wasted. You lean back, letting your eyes drift across the collection, a constellation of symbols glowing faintly under your torchlight. Each one a whisper: stay safe, stay strong, stay remembered. And though the tomb is silent, it feels full alive, almost with meaning, with people's hopes woven into beads and metal, laid gently over the person they loved. These weren't just things, they were promises. You walk further into the tomb, and something catches your eye near the rear wall: rows of small figurines neatly arranged like soldiers waiting for orders. Their faces are serene, their arms crossed over tiny chests, and some carry miniature tools, hose baskets, even shovels. These are Shabtis. And they weren't just decoration. They were workers, eternal workers. In the Egyptian afterlife, there was no floating on clouds or strumming harps. The fields of Aru, the paradise of reeds, still required effort. Crops needed tending. Canals needed dredging. The gods, it seemed, expected you to pull your weight, unless, of course, you brought backup. You pick up one figurine carved from glazed faience in a dusty turquoise hue. The hieroglyphs down its legs are surprisingly sharp. They include a command from the Book of the Dead, essentially saying, "If I'm called to work, you do it for me instead." It's both charming and slightly cheeky eternal life with delegation. Historians still debate whether Shabtis were considered literal magical laborers or symbolic stand-ins. But many tombs, especially of elites, contain dozens, even hundreds of them. Some even had a full set 365 workers, one for each day of the year, plus overseers with tiny whips to make sure the job got done. You look again and spot one figure larger than the others holding a staff. Yep, that's the boss. Quirky fact, the word Shabti evolved over time. Early versions were called Ushabtis, later Shawaptis. Some were carved from stone, others molded from mud and painted. By the late period, it was common for these figures to include highly detailed spells, making them miniature legal contracts with the afterlife. You imagine an accountant in Thebes specializing in Shabti contracts, guaranteed labor coverage, or your soul back. Next to the Shabtis lies something unexpected, a bundle wrapped in coarse linen shaped like a blade. You carefully unwrap it, a dagger bronze with a bone handle, its edge still sharp enough to nick a careless thumb. Alongside it, a flint knife, a wooden club, and what might be a slingshot. These were tools and weapons for the afterlife. And they weren't metaphorical. The Egyptians believed you'd need to defend yourself against threats or help defend the gods. After all, chaos never sleeps. You glance at the murals on the wall behind you. One shows the deceased standing behind Horus as he fights a giant snake, likely Apep, the god of disorder. Another panel shows the same man planting barley beside a canal. Life after death, it wasn't just about peace. It was a continuation of responsibility. A bit further on, you spot more tools, plows, chisels, and tiny baskets made of twine. Some are scaled down, symbolic versions. Others seem fully usable, like someone might genuinely try them out. One little hoe even has a copper blade riveted to a wooden handle. Real care was taken to make it functional. Quirky detail. Some tombs included furniture models, miniature beds, chairs, even tiny beer vats. These dollhouse pieces weren't for play. They were magical prototypes ready to grow into the real thing in the afterlife. You lean against a stone ledge, trying to take it all in. The idea wasn't to escape the world, but to rebuild it, to walk into the next realm, not empty-handed, but equipped with help, with tools, with the know-how to sow, harvest, defend, and build. Historians still argue whether this was a literal expectation or a symbolic comfort. Were the Shabtis meant to actually work, or just ease the fear of going alone? But in either case, the presence of these objects tells a deeper truth. Ancient Egyptians didn't just want to be remembered, they wanted to continue. You pick up one final figurine, this one carved from wood, its paint mostly faded. It's a man carrying two baskets slung over his shoulders. His face is calm. You wonder whose name he carried, whose soul he promised to serve. You set him back in place carefully, respectfully. He's got work to do, and so do you, explorer. We're only just starting to unpack this afterlife. As you move toward the next alcove, the air thickens with a different kind of memory, one of taste, scent, and shared meals long forgotten. There, under a low stone shelf, are baskets of dried goods. Some still hold their shape. Others have crumbled to dust, but their purpose lingers like a ghost of a feast. Welcome to the pantry of the afterlife. You crouch beside a long clay tray filled with what looks like dried bread. The loaves are round, flat hard as bricks now, but you can still make out the scored tops, even the impression of fingers that once shaped the dough. Next to them, figs, pitted dates, cracked walnuts. Their color has faded, but the shapes remain. These were food offerings, not symbolic, not decorative, real food, placed with the belief that the soul would continue to eat, drink, and savor the joys of the table in eternity. And honestly, after being mummified, judged, and put to work in the field of reeds, you've earned a snack. You move to a line of ceramic beer jugs, their necks sealed with ancient pitch. Egyptians brewed beer, thick, cloudy, and slightly sweet, more like liquid bread than the pilsners of today. Historians still debate whether these jugs were left full or symbolically sealed, but in some tombs, residues show traces of emmer wheat and date sugars. You imagine popping the cork and finding the world's oldest IPA. Quirky fact, some tombs had loaves of bread shaped like animals or gods' little edible spells. Others included preserved meats, fish wrapped in papyrus, even ribs of ox. You pass one such bundle, now tied neatly with faded twine and labeled in hieroglyphs, roast duck for the car. Ah yes, the car, the life force that remained after death and needed nourishment. Without offerings, the car would weaken. That's why tombs included offering tables, carved stone slabs with shallow grooves for oils, and inscriptions listing menus for the deceased. One offering slab nearby reads 1,000 of bread, 1,000 of beer, 1,000 of oxen, 1,000 of fowl. Was it literal? No. But magical? Absolutely. Say the words right, and the gods deliver. You find a wooden chest near the far wall, sealed and cracked with age. You lift the lid, and inside are jars of honey now crystallized. The Egyptians prized honey not just as food, but as medicine offering and preservative. One text even calls it the tears of Ra. Next to the chest are small clay pots with what looks like dried herbs, possibly coriander, fenugreek, or mint. These weren't just flavorings. Some had religious significance. Others were used in burial rituals. You pinch a bit of the brittle leaves and catch the faintest whiff, spicy, medicinal, familiar. And here's the charming part. Many of these offerings were handmade by the family. There are finger marks in the dough, casual brushstrokes on the painted bowls, even a few misspelled hieroglyphs carved into bread molds. These weren't always the work of professionals. They were gifts, some careful, others hurried, all meaningful. Quirky notes from tombs included lists of favorite foods inscribed on papyrus scrolls or wall panels, essentially eternal grocery orders. One noblewoman, for instance, requested grapes, beer, and freshly caught fish from the Nile, not the canals. She had standards even in death. You pass a mural showing the deceased seated at a banquet table, arms raised in joy, guests surrounding him. In his hands, a cup, possibly of wine. Historians still argue whether fermented grape wine was widely used or reserved for elites, but in the afterlife, you could have whatever you wanted. You move on and find a set of miniature clay loaves, perfectly sculpted, but clearly not edible. Symbolic backups, perhaps, for when the real thing spoiled. Even the fail-safes had fail-safes. There's something deeply human here. All the grandeur, all the gold, yes, it's impressive. But it's this corner of the tomb that feels most familiar. Someone packed their favorite snack. Someone brewed their favorite beer. Someone somewhere knew that comfort comes not just from magic, but from the warm, remembered taste of home. You step back, glancing over the baskets and jars, the loaves and dried fruit. A final meal, lovingly packed, waiting in silence. Not for the living, not for guests, but for the eternal guest of honor resting nearby. And in that quiet stillness, you feel it, the care, the hunger, the hope that in the next world you wouldn't arrive empty-handed or with an empty stomach. You turn now toward a cedar chest painted in soft ochre and blue. Its lid has been slightly shifted, and from inside spills the corner of something ivory white linen perfectly folded despite the weight of centuries. You lift it gently. Clothing, full set. Not the heavy robes of a priest or the gaudy headdress of a pharaoh, but the simple refined garments of daily Egyptian life, still crisp in their arrangement. The fabric is fine, woven from flax into linen, so light it almost floats between your fingers. This wasn't tossed in last minute. It was chosen, folded and packed like a final suitcase. In the afterlife, you didn't wake up naked. You woke up prepared. You unfold a tunic. It's cut in the classic T-shaped sleeveless with decorative stitching along the neckline. Next to it, you find a sash dyed faintly with indigo, and beneath that, a pair of sandals like the ones you saw earlier. Only these aren't worn. These are pristine. Quirky fact, some tombs included dozens of outfits, especially for nobles, everyday tunics, festival garments, even special linens for the judgment scene before Osiris. Historians still debate whether these were symbolic or meant to be worn in some metaphysical sense, but clearly arriving well-dressed was important. You find wigs too carefully preserved and wrapped in cloth. Ancient Egyptians often shaved their heads for hygiene, but wore elaborate wigs on formal occasions. One here is tightly curled, made of human hair, dark and glossy. Another is plaited with small beads and perfumed wax cones meant to melt slowly and release fragrance during ritual events. That leads you to a small alabaster box. You lift the lid, and even now the scent is faint but unmistakable myrrh, frankincense, and something sweet, possibly lotus oil. Ancient Egyptians valued perfumes not just for beauty, but for purity. The gods, after all, were thought to appreciate good hygiene. You chuckle softly. Eternal life, it seems, had its dress code and a fragrance standard. Nearby, a painted wooden figure shows the deceased receiving clothing from a servant in the afterlife like a divine valet. On the wall behind it is a list and inventory etched in careful script. One tunic of fine linen, 2 sashes dyed red, a pair of reed sandals, 1 wig full style, 1 jar of sweet oil. Historians sometimes call these tomb lists the ancient equivalent of packing checklists. And just like today, they varied by status. A pharaoh's list might include royal diadems and panther skin cloaks. A farmer's list, 1 good tunic and clean sandals. But the intention was always the same: arrive dressed presentable and prepared to meet gods. Quirky notes, some tombs included laundry lists. Yes, even for the afterlife. A few even depict the deceased overseeing laundry being done by servants in the underworld. Clearly the field of reeds didn't come with a dry cleaner. You find another small box inlaid with ivory. Inside, a wooden coal stick and a tiny mirror. The mirror's bronze surface is tarnished but still faintly reflective. This wasn't for vanity. It was for ceremony, a way to reflect divine light to see your purified self. Next to it, a jar of kohl eyeliner, still dense and black. Ancient Egyptians wore kohl not just for aesthetics, but for protection against both the harsh sun and the evil eye. You dip your finger in gently. The powder is dry, but unmistakable. You pause and notice a folded item tucked beneath the chest. You lift it and find a netted tunic made from rows of faience beads sewn into a lattice. It would have shimmered in sunlight, making the wearer appear almost otherworldly. You imagine it catching the light as they stepped into the next life, brilliant and silent. Then there's the headrest, a curved piece of wood meant to cradle the neck, often packed in tombs, to ensure comfort during the soul's slumber. The idea that even the dead deserved ergonomic support speaks volumes. Historians still debate whether headrests were truly used in life or served purely symbolic roles in death. You step back and look at the entire scene. Garments arranged like offerings, perfumes tucked beside combs, headrests and wigs aligned in tidy rows. It's a dressing room, frozen in time, waiting for its occupant to rise and don it all anew. And there's something moving in that. Not just the practicality, but the hope that you wouldn't just exist in the afterlife. You'd live in it. Smell good. Feel good. Be recognized. Be remembered. In life, Egyptians celebrated the body with care, decoration, and ritual. In death, they simply continued. And here you are centuries later, opening their closet, finding that their wish to be seen, really seen, has come true. You drift deeper into the tomb, your footsteps muffled by fine dust and silence. Gods used it. Kings used it. Regular folks, they packed it. You kneel beside a chest decorated with a pattern of zigzag lines. Waves, maybe, or magical protection symbols. Inside are dozens of amulets, all small, all distinct. Some are tucked into tiny linen pouches. Others are strung on faded cords ready to be worn. You lift the first, a scarab beetle, carved in green jasper. It fits snugly in your palm, its underside inscribed with hieroglyphs. This one likely sat over the heart to help it speak truth in judgment. Some scarabs even had spell 30b from the Book of the Dead etched into them, a kind of spiritual pre-written statement for court. You pick up another, a small eye of Horus, or wedjat, deep blue, made from faience, still glossy. Promised health, wholeness, and rebirth. Next to it, a tiny ankh, the looped cross symbolizing eternal life. You can picture it being pressed into a child's hand during a funeral ceremony, the way we'd offer a flower or token. Quirky fact, some mummies have been found with over 100 amulets sewn directly into their wrappings. Others had gold tongue amulets intended to help them speak clearly in the afterlife. It's unclear how widespread these practices were. Historians still debate whether they were reserved for the wealthy or if poor families made their own versions from clay or bone. In the next box, you find tiny figurines, gods in miniature. Isis with her wings folded. Thoth with his ibis head bent in thought body, arching like a cat mid-pounce. These weren't just decorations. They were companions, protectors, intercessors who might vouch for you or guard your journey. You pause at one particularly worn item, a djed pillar symbol of stability carved from faded ivory. It represents the spine of Osiris, both literally and symbolically. You imagine someone holding it tightly during burial rites, hoping the god would lend them strength. Nearby, a bundle wrapped in linen contains something odd, a model snake painted red and black. It might seem alarming, but in Egyptian magic, snakes weren't just threats. They were also guardians. Uraeus cobras adorned the brows of pharaohs, and the goddess Wadjet was depicted as one. You tuck it back gently, best not to make eye contact too long. You find a small papyrus roll tied with faded reed string. You unroll it carefully. Inside are lines of hieratic script, written in a tight, practiced hand. This isn't the Book of the Dead. It's something more specific, a personal spell perhaps, or a love charm. Historians have uncovered such scroll spells to call back a lost spouse to ward off scorpions, to ensure safe passage through fire. Magic was intimate. You pause at a cluster of tiny knives and wands made of ivory and carved wood. The wands curve slightly like crescent moons and are covered in carved images. Crocodiles, frogs, lions, naked goddesses dancing. These were apotropaic wands, used to protect pregnant women and infants. But here in the tomb, they became defense tools for the journey beyond. Quirky side note, one wand was found inscribed with May, the goddess repel every crocodile that comes to you, every snake that bites. You wonder how many sleep-deprived Egyptian parents whispered the same wish in life and kept wishing it in death. You stand slowly taking in the spread. Amulets like armor, spells like passwords, figurines like trusted friends. It's not just treasure, it's a toolkit. Historians still argue over which items were essential, which were optional, and which were deeply personal. Some tombs overflowed with amulets. Others had just one. But across all levels of wealth, there's the same quiet hope that magic works, that the dark will listen to words and bend. And honestly, after mummification, judgment trials, monster-filled rivers and gods with animal heads, a little backup never hurts. You step away from the magical trove, heart a bit lighter, as if the Heka lingers in the air, warm, watchful, and still doing its job. You move toward the back of the tomb now, where the light thins and the shadows deepen. There's something different about this area, quieter, more intimate. The walls here are unpainted. The air smells faintly of resin and old ash. And nestled into a low alcove half hidden by draped linen, you see something remarkable. Furniture. Not miniature models, not carvings. Actual life-sized furniture tucked into the tomb, as if the deceased might sit up at any moment and say, "I'd rather face judgment in a comfortable chair." Thank you very much. You brush off a thin layer of dust from a wooden headrest. It's curved at the top, shaped to cradle the neck, and rests on a flat base carved with lotus petals. The wood is sycamore, or perhaps cedar, darkened by age, but still smooth where it was handled often. Egyptians believed this position of sleeping head slightly elevated helped keep evil spirits from entering the body through the ears. Functional and mystical. Next to it is a folding stool, its legs inlaid with ivory and ending in carved duck feet. You picture it being carried into the tomb with ceremonial care, as if the deceased might need to freshen up or hold a reception on the other side. Even beds were sometimes included, low, gently curved, often with footboards shaped like lion heads. Imagine spending eternity stretched out on a hand-carved lion bed. Sounds oddly regal. Historians still debate whether these full-size pieces were ever used in life or commissioned specifically for burial. Some show signs of wear, others look showroom new. Perhaps it depended on the family's wealth or on how confident they were about their loved one's needs in the afterlife. You open a cedar chest nearby, its interior lined with linen. Inside, games. Specifically a game board with blue and white inlay laid out neatly beside tiny carved pieces. This is Senet, one of the oldest known board games, a bit like a mix between backgammon and snakes and ladders. Senet wasn't just a pastime. It symbolized the journey of the soul. Each move on the board was a metaphor. Progress through chaos, protection from evil, and eventual rebirth. You imagine the deceased sitting on their lion bed, flicking game pieces across the board by candlelight, occasionally muttering, "Ugh, 3 spaces back again." Quirky fact: Senet sets have been found in both royal and commoner tombs. Some were elaborate and inlaid with precious materials. Others were scratched into pottery shards, but all pointed to the same belief: the afterlife could include leisure and competition. You pass a box of cosmetic tools, combs, tweezers, small bronze razors. Even in death, grooming mattered. The gods apparently appreciated a tidy beard. There's even a small perfume burner shaped like a lotus with soot marks still visible on the rim. Maybe the final rites included one last scent of home. Leaning against the far wall is something curious, a tall staff capped with a papyrus bloom. It was likely symbolic, a marker of authority or mobility. But it's hard not to see it also as practical. If your journey through the underworld got rough, at least you'd have something to lean on. Near it lies a fan made of palm fibers bound with gold thread. Some tombs of nobles and royals included entire fan bearers, figures painted onto the walls, fanning the deceased in perpetuity. And here, even with no servants around, the fan itself still waits. Quirky side note: in a few high-status tombs, archaeologists have found footstools and slippers complete with tiny name tags. It's unclear if these were actually used in life or provided solely for comfort beyond. Historians still puzzle over it. Perhaps the underworld was just chilly. Finally, you reach a shelf with vessels of all shapes. Small clay jugs, alabaster bowls, and sealed jars. Some likely held water, others beer or wine. and a few may have contained milk from a sacred cow, a rare funerary offering tied to the goddess Hathor. Each container has a different symbol etched into it, marking its intended content and use. Some are practical, others symbolic, but all reflect the idea that even in eternity, you'd need to eat, drink, and rest. You step back and take it in, kid. A furnished suite, not unlike a home. A bed to sleep in, games to play, perfume to enjoy, even a comb to fix your wig. This wasn't a prison or a vault. It was a lifestyle package prepared with quiet devotion and just a hint of flair. And maybe that's what surprises you most, not the gold or the spells or even the gods, but the normalcy, the comfort, the human touches. Because in the end, the Egyptians didn't just prepare to die, they prepared to live again. As you step past the resting place of beds and board games, a sudden draft of cooler air brushes your cheek, a gentle reminder that you're deep within stone and time. In the far corner of the tomb, partially shielded by a standing panel of carved limestone, lies a space more intimate than all the others. This is the storage of linens and personal items, soft, quiet things folded into memory. You kneel before a cedar box, its latch still intact after millennia. The lid creaks slightly as you lift it, and inside you find something surprisingly tender. Bundles of linen, neatly rolled, tied with woven palm cord. Some are embroidered with faint thread, golden spirals, reed motifs, tiny lotuses. Others are plain, but pristinely white. These aren't just wrapping cloths or extras for mummification. They're changes of clothing. The deceased was expected to attend feasts, receive visitors, even walk in the field of reeds. Naturally, one would want options. Historians still argue about how often tombs included full wardrobes. While royalty and high priests left behind entire linen closets, even humble tombs might contain at least one clean tunic for the afterlife. Egyptian fashion never really went out of style, it simply changed texture. Beside the linen bundles lies a mirror, polished bronze round, with a carved ivory handle shaped like a papyrus stem. Its surface is dimmed by time, but still faintly reflective. You tilt it and catch your own ghostly face staring back. The 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 face staring